We live in a world governed by strict scientific laws. We know how cells divide, how gravity pulls, and how chemicals react. But throughout history, we also have records of religious phenomena that seem to ignore those physical rules completely. Imagine dropping an apple and watching it fall up instead of down. That is the kind of event we're investigating, an anomaly claim where the physical laws of our universe appear to simply stop working. So, what happens when you take history's most famous anomalies and put them under a modern microscope? What happens when the most rigorous, secular doctors on Earth are forced to test them? If an event holds up to that kind of strict scientific testing, it tells us something important. It points directly toward a cause that exists outside the natural world. This diagram shows our starting point, a perfectly balanced scale. To test these claims fairly, we have to remove all personal bias. We start with a blank slate, with the natural and supernatural possibilities resting exactly at 50-50. From here, only hard data moves the needle. Verifiable medical evidence pushes the scale to the right. Proven fraud or ordinary chemical explanations push it back to the left. By stripping away both religious enthusiasm and rigid skepticism, we allow the raw data and the medical records to dictate the actual probability of a miracle. Let's test this framework at the Grotto of Lourdes in France. Over the decades, hundreds of millions of pilgrims have traveled to this specific site, and thousands of them have reported sudden physical healings. To investigate these claims, an independent medical bureau was formed. Their verification process is extremely demanding. It requires supermajorities from dozens of specialists, and the evaluations take years. The standards here are often stricter and take much longer than the clinical trials used to approve new medications. In 2025, the Bureau concluded their review of Antonetta Rocco. 19 years earlier, doctors diagnosed her with a condition called primary lateral sclerosis. Doctors found her nerves were slowly shutting down, leading to progressive, irreversible paralysis. It's a steady, one-way slide toward a wheelchair, and modern medicine has no way to stop it, let alone reverse it. During the visit to the baths at Lourdes, Antonetta reported hearing a voice. Shortly afterward, she stood up and walked on her own. There was no recovery period, no physical therapy, and no medical treatment that could explain her sudden ability to walk. This visualization shows how her medical data affects our balance. After 16 years of continuous investigation, a supermajority of the independent doctors declared her organic cure completely unexplained. This pushes our scale firmly onto the supernatural side. The intense skepticism and extreme standards of the examining doctors themselves are what force this case into a high probability of being supernatural. Now consider the case of Padre Pio. For 50 uninterrupted years, this monk exhibited continuously bleeding wounds on his hands, feet, and side. Investigators looking for a natural explanation found a strong one. Records showed he secretly purchased carbolic acid. The skeptical argument is that he used this caustic chemical to burn the wounds into his own skin. But we have to measure that theory against the reality of human biology. Destroying tissue with acid over 5 decades leads to severe chemical rot and massive scarring. When doctors examined Padre Pio at the time of his death, the wounds had completely vanished. His skin was perfectly smooth, and there was absolutely zero scar tissue. Here is how that evidence plays out on our scale. The documented acid purchases keep the claim grounded, but the biological impossibility of a chronic wound vanishing without a trace pulls the final probability slightly over the 50% mark. This disappearance of 50 years of wounds stands in direct opposition to everything we know about how human skin heals. We see similar patterns in other categories. The body of a Lebanese monk named Saint Charbel secreted a liquid mixture of blood and sweat for 67 years after his death. With no natural explanation for this, our scale moves to 60% for the supernatural. The Shroud of Turin also presents a challenge. It encodes accurate 3D spatial data centuries before computers existed. Because the evidence for its age is so conflicted, this case sits right on the edge, at 50%. At Fatima, 3 young children predicted a massive atmospheric event weeks in advance. Because there is no record of the sun actually moving in space, this prediction also hovers right at that 50% midpoint. Not every claim holds up. A forensic review of the image found conventional paint on canvas, tipping this specific case back toward the natural side at 30%. When you combine these percentages, ranging from a 60% likelihood in Lebanon to a 30% likelihood in Mexico, you see a pattern that a single natural fluke cannot explain. When faced with phenomena like this, people often try to evaluate them in isolation. You can examine one case at a time and perhaps find a plausible excuse to dismiss one strange medical recovery or one bizarre historical artifact. This graphic demonstrates a mathematical concept called compound probability. If you flip a coin, you have a 50% chance of getting heads. But if you try to flip 6 heads in a row, the odds of that happening drop drastically with every single toss. The same math applies to our historical anomalies. One strange medical event could be a fluke of nature, but the odds of nature producing 6 entirely different, perfectly timed, deeply verified physical impossibilities multiply against each other. The ultimate question is not whether one specific investigation has a minor flaw. The question is whether it is mathematically rational to assume that every single one of these impossible events is a perfectly natural coincidence. We have weighed the evidence. We've looked at the medical bureaus, the scarless wounds, the unreproducible images, and the mass-witnessed predictions. This chart shows the final, objective calculation. When we multiply the midpoints of the 6 cases we've just explored, the probability that they are all purely natural events is exactly 1.3%. This leaves us with a staggering inverse, a 98.7% probability that at least one of these events involves a force entirely beyond our natural world. The science has been weighed. The math is clear. Now you have to decide what that number means for your own understanding of reality.